myself, Graham, Matt and Richard were tasked by Pete to come up with a presentation or some ideas about how we measure greatness in our chapters. So I kind of look after the software development, if you didn't know already. So if you're happy with what we have built over the last year, then come and buy me coffee. If you're not, then tough, I guess. So yeah, I was thinking about greatness, and obviously if you know a little about me, obviously my mind, I was thinking about what is greatness, and me being Louis, my mind instinctively went to thinking about religious figures. I thought it's not very politically correct for me to bring them up, so I thought let's think about sport. Let's talk about sport. So I was thinking about what defines greatness in sport, and I was thinking the two people that came to my mind were Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer. And I want to just play you this little clip, and I want you to watch it. It's back from 2009. It's in the final of the Australian Open, and Nadal had played like 5 hours in the semi-finals, and the day after he had to play a final against Federer, and it went to 5 sets. And it was an incredible game. So if you can see the ball with this resolution, let's go for it.
Is this 11 minutes long?
Get out of here!
Something like that. Yeah, so what is it about these guys that make them great? So they've been playing on the professional circuit for about 10 or 15 years. In Federer's case, it's probably almost nearing 20 years. And they've consistently won, and they've actually beaten each other at different times in their career. Nadal's beaten Federer more than the other way around, but they've lost some really tough games along the way. They've made mistakes, they've had to address, I guess, issues with their game that were a bit weak, and they've gone off and they've changed aspects of the way they play to win more. And the last year was particularly significant because they both shared at the age of 36 for Federer and 31 Nadal, 2 majors each in the last year, which is kind of incredible when you think of all the young players coming on the scene. And they've still got that hunger. They've altered their game, and they've just shown, I think, everyone why they are, 2 of the greatest players of all time. And so I was thinking about, how do you then, in the software game, what's the equivalent? And for me, I've always been really impressed by Airbnb. I kind of think they really set the standard, and they kind of came out of nowhere last couple of years. And one of the things that really struck me was when I got into JavaScript, is suddenly they started defining the standards. They had like clear documentation, they had like ESLint guidelines, so much so that I think like millions of people download their ESLint style all over the world. And it's the most commonly used sort of React style and so on. So they set the standard. And if you read some of the things from their sort of team, these are the sort of things that come up. Some of these figures that they merge and deploy. As soon as they merge, they deploy their changes, frequently deploying all the way through the day. And the process of running the tests and the deployment is really, really quick. And that's really interesting, those metrics, isn't it? And I think that really, if you can kind of measure that, that is very a great indicator of success, I think. And obviously we don't work in that same environment, it's more regulated, but it's really interesting that. If you read a little bit more about Airbnb, you'll find that there's a lot of interesting ways of doing things. So if you're an engineer and you're more interested in their equivalent of DB Wizard, you can go to your manager and you can say, I want to work on that. And they have that freedom to go and change between teams. And they really own things all the way from start to the end. So if you want to learn more about Airbnb, I would definitely read a little bit more on their blogs and so on, because they've got some really interesting ways of doing things. And I think this is something that we've been trying to develop here at Wealth Wizards. We don't think that someone who's getting better and better technically necessarily has to take on being a people manager. And it doesn't mean to say, let's say you're a senior software engineer and you want to get promoted, you want to get more money, but perhaps you're not really kind of like a leader of a team, you're not maybe that confident in doing that, and you don't really want to grow into that role, but you still want to get promoted. At Airbnb, they have this track, a technical track, where you can get promoted without having to take on people management. And I think that's something that's really important. And they see management as a different type of thing. It's not about promotion, it's just something different, in its kind of way. So I think that's really interesting as well. So in summary, fast pace of change and so on. So I was just thinking about where we were last year. And I don't want to be sort of too, it's easy, isn't it, to come in and just slag off what's already there. That's just so easy to do, and I've been involved in, I've heard about what people have said about me in previous places, and it's kind of painful when you hear that, isn't it? So it's not nice, but at the same time, you know, we had a product that got to market, and there were a lot of really good things about it, and I want to stress those really good things about it. It's not all bad, but what I'm interested in is the low-level details about what makes a development team great, and so on. And I think if we're being really hard and really honest with ourselves, then we didn't have a lot of unit tests. So, and from a developer testing point of view, we were kind of an E. We had some kind of common style in the engine, but not a lot. It's quite varied in the way it is. We didn't have any logging whatsoever. We get no encryption at all in our code. And I think from a developer startup point of view, it was really quite difficult to start to come in and learn how to do stuff in the engine and set stuff up. I think it's quite tricky. So I don't want to say it's all bad. I think actually some of the ideas that we had in the Angular front ends about having kind of different products served off different context routes and so on was actually really quite a nice idea, and we've actually kind of followed that on. So where are we today? We've got a massive amount of low-level testing, a common style, and that kind of feeds on from the Airbnb style guidelines. We're getting better at our logging, and Pete highlighted that. There's still some way to go. We are securing some data. I've never worked in a place before actually which encrypts any data in its database. So the fact we're even doing it is quite significant. But we're not at an A standard, and we're doing something to get there. I think people do contribute. I mean, I remember just the other day. I remember Scott pushing something into the master branch in at least the first couple of days. And we've adopted this thing called Pact, and so we're sort of starting to improve things. I do think one of the things I really want to hone in on, we talked about it a bit with Graham, is our front-end architecture. So I still think we've got a long way to go in the fact that we change context routes at the moment when we're serving different products up, and we download 1.5 meg of JavaScript every time. And that's compressed, that's already compressed, and there's been some attempt to improve that, but it's not a particularly good architecture that we've got there, and I think that's something that in the next year, as well as the other two things, we really need to improve on. So we're already talking about security, we've got a plan for that. We're rolling Pact out across the board in our different microservices, and that should help us, hopefully, as we scale to the level that Pete's already mentioned. And I've talked a little bit about our front-end architecture. So I was talking to some guys at the Brum.js talk I gave the other day, and they were saying that they've been really going hard on code splitting, and they've managed to get their bundle size down from like 1.5 meg, 2 meg to like 300 kilobytes when it first loads, and then they asynchronously load bits of the site as they progressively go to different parts, and that's at Purple Bricks. Use of a CDN, and serving different parts of our UIs from our actual microservice, back-end microservice as well. So we talked about this with Mark, and how we get over this problem we have with React. So if you've got any ideas on that, we're really keen, and I really want to see us doing some spikes as part of our sort of tech debt time in our sprints to try and tackle this in the next year to really improve it. So that's where I think we need to improve. So I was thinking, Pete was sort of asking, how do you measure greatness in software development? And I think that there's only one key metric that matters, and you need to measure it through the lens of 3 questions. That's my kind of gambit, my sort of mantra. So the one key metric, I think, is all about how many instant advice cases we're generating. We've got that board up there, and I suppose if you looked at that board and you compared it to some numbers, let's say, I don't know, user numbers on the BBC or something, it would look sort of, discouraging, wouldn't it? Yeah. So, but you've got to measure it therefore through the lens of 3 different questions, and those questions are, what are we committing to with the customer? Are we improving over time? And are our customers seeing any value in it? And so if we measure it through those things, then actually we start to see things in a more measured and more objective sense, rather than just something that's just irrational and subjective. So a commitment, what is commitment? Often, my wife's often asked me that question, I sometimes think, what does the business think a story point is? No one really knows. We don't have a common type definition of what a story point is across different teams. Is our commitment visible and public to the business? I think it is, maybe, but it's kind of behind the scenes in different sort of senior meetings that we don't necessarily know about. Do we monitor our sprint progress? Are our burn down figures improving over time, and so on? That's kind of commitment. And we could look at graphs like this. I was thinking about which measure you sort of, are we improving? But because we don't really take necessarily our estimates as serious as we should, then we don't necessarily get a meaningful graph. Again, it's better to look at trends over time rather than just figures on a one-off basis. Are we improving? I think I thought about these kind of metrics, measuring these over time, but I don't think really in reality that they can be twisted by developers. You know, you can just add a couple of lines more tests and you can get your coverage up, and it doesn't really mean anything. I think what really matters is your number of bugs in production and your velocity over time. Was it of value? Again, I think there's lots of things you can do about assigning cost to a particular feature and trying to measure whether it's a save your customer money. But the easiest thing to look at, I think, is whether it's reducing referrals. In other words, are they getting instant advice? So it comes back round to that. And how do we implement this? So I've already had a quick chat with a few people around how do we really get the estimation locked down so that it's similar across teams, and then we can really start to track this stuff and improve the visibility to the business. Mark suggested a really good idea of, you know, this is their definition. They only have these 5 options when estimating. 1, they could do it easily within a day. 8 is, you never have more than an 8 for an estimation. Although if you do, then you break it down into smaller bits, and then you measure it kind of relatively between those 2 ends of the spectrum. So that was quite an interesting way of doing it. And I think I'd like to roll that out, but I'd like to, you know, see what other people think before we do that. So that'd be really interesting to me, to get meaningful graphs, meaningful trends over time. And are you happy as well? This is a really key thing for developers. There's a lot of change going on, people coming and going. This is my daughter a couple of years ago. She's a bit older now, but yeah, I mean, we often think of Office Vibe as a bit of a joke, you know, but it does really matter. Take it seriously, because, you know, finding out how you're feeling is quite important. And take your one-to-one seriously, because it's a two-way thing. Because if you turn up to a one-to-one and you've got nothing to say and it's all coming from the manager, you're not going to get the most out of your one-to-ones. We want to know if you're unhappy, because we want to do something about it. I don't want to come and work with someone who's unhappy. I want people to enjoy their jobs. I want people to get fulfillment. And ultimately, we want people to stay. And that involves a whole number of factors. So, you know, let your manager know if you're unhappy. Point something out. Point why, you know, something can be improved. That's a key. You know, that's important to us. You know, whether you're happy at work. So that's my talk. Any questions?